analysts saying the infected brands urgently need help.
The business leaders and the IT leaders are getting squeezed in the middle, and the expectation is that all of you guys here are going to fix that.
It's not the large that's going to beat the small, it's the fast that's going to eat the slow.
Digital genuinely changes everything.
How are you becoming responsible for the customer experience?
IT and technology has never been more important in their organizations than it is now.
To provide better insights and to build a better world, that is the opportunity of our generation.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Hello, good afternoon, good morning to those of you in the US, and welcome to the Transformation Tune-In series. My name is Ben Thompson. I will be your host over the next 60 minutes. It's great to have you all here. Over the last few weeks here on Transformation Tune-In, we have been taking a deep dive into all aspects of the transformation journey, how to become more agile, how to become more resilient, how to build and future-proof your organization against whatever might come next. And of course, we have also been taking a look at how the impact of recent months has impacted and indeed accelerated in many instances the transformation journeys that you are all on. Today, this week, we are going to be talking about the automotive sector. Obviously an industry that was already dramatically changing pre-COVID with the rise of connected, autonomous, electric, shared driving, causing unprecedented technology and business model shifts. Throw in a global lockdown that's putting additional stress on the sector, disrupting supply chains, changing financial picture, and shifting consumer behaviors and demand perhaps forever, and you have an interesting time. Yet amid the disruption, there is always the opportunity to build upon potential new revenue streams such as autonomous driving and harness emerging data services that can be delivered to mobile platforms. The question is, how do you position yourself now to make the most of that opportunity going forward? That is what we are here to discuss today. And while we have assembled a panel of experts to explore those issues in greater detail, we do want this to be an interactive session. So I encourage you all to ask questions throughout. You can do that by using the Q&A box that sits at the bottom of your Zoom platform there. We do just pop your questions in the box. We will do our best to get through as many as possible and get those answered for you either as we go along or during the period we have set aside for audience Q&A at the end of the session. So let's just meet our guests quickly. Hopefully everybody should be able to see my screen there. So joining us on today's show, we have David Lander. David is SVP for Go-to-Market over at Dell Technologies. We have Gary Clark. Gary is COO for Automotive Cloud over at Volkswagen, also formerly the CIO at Tesla. We have Teodoro Leo. Teodoro is MD for Automotive and Mobility at Accenture. We have Dubravko Hlede. Dubravko is IT manager for Rimac Automobili. We have Hank Skorny. Hank is president for Aptiv Connective Services. And we have Said Tabet. Said is distinguished engineer, chief architect over in the office of the CTO for Dell Technologies. So we've got some great guests, all eager to share their thoughts. Before we call them up, just to give you a flavor of what they will be talking about, we would like to maybe just run a short video that should hopefully provide some additional context for that conversation, as well as provide some interesting talking points in its own right. So hopefully that video will play.
Going into the next few years, the most fundamental topic to be resolved by the industry is one of business model.
The profit pools are no longer in manufacturing because of the saturation. It's in developing these new upstream services. It's all about the services now.
Data management, artificial intelligence, cloud technology. That's just for one aspect of the automotive industry that is moving towards connectivity and autonomous.
There will be data generated from vehicles across the globe. How to actually tag, manipulate, understand, use, monetize that data over time.
Okay, great. So some interesting talking points there, and we're going to dive into that conversation. So part one of the show is all about responding to a disruption, the hottest of hot topics, even in an industry that has been experiencing multiple disruptions over the past few years. So if I could ask our first guests to unhide their cameras and to unmute themselves, we'll get that conversation started. So please welcome Gary Clark, Hank Skorny, and Dubravko Hlede. And here to lead us through that discussion, you saw him on the video very briefly there. I'm going to hand over to Dell Technologies' very own David Lander. David, over to you.
Super, thanks, Ben. Really appreciate you doing that. Okay, so Gary, Dubravko, and Hank, the first question I want to talk through is really just build on what Ben was saying at the beginning around this industry was going through transformation, you know, prior to COVID-19, driven by connected, autonomous, electric, and the shared driving. Going through this unprecedented time that we've been through, what do you see the impact of coming out of COVID-19? You know, has it affected operations? How are you seeing the customer behaviors changing? And are you seeing the your priorities shifting as a result of this? So let me start with Gary. You want to give us your thoughts on this?
Sure. Well, one of the byproducts of the COVID was the miraculous change in the quality of the air. So it's kind of an interesting byproduct, but it gives us a leader into some of the improvements in technology in the vehicle and the scale of the cleaner fleets of the future. So I think this is shown us as what's possible. Obviously, the aircraft are grossly on the ground too in many parts of the world, given the same travel restriction problems. But it's given us a glimpse as to why the mission towards electric vehicles is a critical one. It's shown particularly in some of the urban areas where the air hasn't been this clean, I think, since the horse and buggy was around in some cases, because all of a sudden it's a dramatic impact. So with Volkswagen's thrust towards electrification of a significant part of the fleet, and in support of that, a very extensive mission in the factory to get to carbon neutral in quite an accelerated program. So this is accelerated the point because it's also given us a very clear target. It shows us what could be possible. So I think that's an interesting kickoff. So that's the impact of the disruption, but it's giving us a North Star to aim at, which I think is a good start. Okay,
oh, great. Yeah, so you think the environmental impact and everything that we're seeing, all the positives that are coming out for that, is really going to, companies and I guess the consumer, it's going to really notice the difference, right? And they're going to change in their behaviors around how we really drive that forward.
Yeah, I think it's given us a glimpse into what's possible, and I think it gives a clarity of vision which we could only be able to talk about more theoretically, whereas people now in various areas have come up with, wow, look at the impact on the air, look at the freshness, look at the cleanliness. This is so this helps reinforce the mission, I think. Yeah.
Okay, great. Hank, from an Aptiv perspective, you know, and again, I know you're looking at services. What are you seeing as the impact coming out of COVID-19?
I think there were a couple of trends before COVID, and then there are some trends that have just continued and even been amplified by COVID coming out the other side. Prior to COVID, and as many of you know in the technology industry, and I come from a long history in the compute and mobile industry, continuous improvement via connectivity was starting to come to the automotive industry. And we've been supporting that as part of our connectivity and our active safety devices by connecting the whole design and test phase straight through to the phase where the vehicles are in market. So we're continuously learning and improving, you know, like has been happening with applications, web applications, and even, you know, smart you know, vocal assistants like we all use every day in the computer and mobile world today. Of course, as Gary mentioned, environmental was already also a big impact, and being able to do things like real-time emissions were critical. But the market was already starting to slow just prior to COVID, and there was a lot of sort of, maybe not storm clouds, but a low pressure system on the horizon,
Right.
and cost concerns were starting to come up, for all of the parties in the automotive industry, and worrying about things like warranty. Just the automotive manufacturers, not including all the other parties, the tier ones, all the other suppliers, not even including a lot of the logistics and the maintenance, cost the industry over $50 billion a year, just the warranty by the OEs themselves. Okay. Of course, maintenance also has a massive impact on cost, throughout the dealer distribution network, dealer servicing network, et cetera. All of that was starting to come under focus, and all of the leading OEs were starting to take steps to how can we reduce that going into a down market with the extra load that places, on the vehicles, and of course, customer satisfaction. But I'll tell you that the biggest change coming into COVID, we'd had a focused effort on commercial vehicles because logistics has been in a crisis for years. There's been a couple of key factors happening. First of all, just a worldwide shortage of drivers. No one can find drivers, and every minute a truck is sitting in a position where it's not moving. Right, without a driver behind the wheel, moving at high speed, right? Even when it's sitting at a stop sign or at a weigh station or a custom station, right, it's losing money.
Right.
And that was already a massive crisis. Further on, the digital retail revolution was affecting everyone as well, where you need connectivity from the point of manufacture to long haul, shipping straight through to the last mile with a light commercial or vehicle showing up at your doorstep, or a motorbike showing up at your doorstep, and connectivity was driving a massive change. That has only increased dramatically, actually, with COVID.
Okay. And then, so have you changing your priorities then from an Aptiv perspective? Because you've seen this accelerated now due to COVID?
Yeah, in fact, certainly on the warranty and the maintenance area, we're starting to work closely with OEs. We do design, test, and validation already for close to 80% of all the vehicles worldwide. So we work with the designing of the vehicle. We have these really advanced connectivity boxes that sit on the vehicles during test and validation. And what we do is we analyze thousands of algorithms to improve to detect poor operation, but then to improve the operation of the vehicle. We've now redoubled our efforts in that to put that into effect for the OEs to be able to save cost of warranty and maintenance. The other side is we are accelerating our deployments with fleets for maintenance and operations.
Okay, makes sense. Thanks, Hank. Let me bring Dubravko. Same question to you around coming into COVID and the impact that you're seeing and the different priorities that's
our priorities was changed significantly because we are not only hit by COVID, like a week after the COVID hit Croatia, we had a major earthquake in our capital, in our headquarters. So we had to evacuate a lot of things and change our priorities. But we managed to completely shift our workforce to remote work in a matter of days. So right now we are in risk mitigation. We are now adapting to new change, and new normal is remote work, and provide our users in our company to work from anywhere, because we are currently considering expanding our business. Our startup is growing. We are deploying offices all around the world, and how to support all offices around the world around the world to work on the same projects that we are doing here. So priorities are shifting from week to week, how the COVID situation develops.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that, I think it was Satya Nadella who said, the world's gone through 5 years of digital acceleration in 3 months, right? And
even less.
All of us we've heard today, from the environmental impact to, the warranty maintenance, to how we service our customers, from logistics to now, how you're opening up offices and remote working. All this is really having an acceleration about how we view it. So, very interesting discussion there. So, Ben, let me hand it back to you, because I think you wanted to run a bit of a poll check there.
Yeah, great. Thanks, David. Some fascinating thoughts. So we have a poll that we're going to run just to get some thoughts from the audience. So I'm going to launch that now. The poll is all around productivity. So how has productivity changed during the pandemic period? Are you more productive? Are you less productive? Have you seen no change at all? So let's get some thoughts from the audience. I'll leave that poll running, give you a chance to answer. And while I do, we have actually got a question from the audience already. So I'm going to ask that just while we're waiting for the folks to get back on the poll. This question comes in from Alexander Kraus. How will the automotive industry manage the requirement for massive investment into new technologies versus significantly reduced revenues? Is returning back to traditional technologies the way to tackle this? Who perhaps, does anybody have any view on that? Gary, maybe I can come to you first with that.
Sure. Okay. With respect to the factory, the manufacturing output, many of our plants are back up in a measured fashion, and so clearly there's from the productivity point of view, very clearly the lines were halted in many cases in certain domains. Most are running at sensible capacity now to meet the ongoing demand. In terms of the pressure on us as the back-end cloud development team, a particular focus, we've been asked to, if anything, speed up. So we're trying to actually go clearly the opposite direction, and if anything, exceed our goals in terms of growth and bringing on more engineering into the team. So yeah, we've been asked to press forward and accelerate the program, if anything, during this time.
Great. I'll just come to you quickly, Dubravko, as well, before we move on. Your thoughts on that question.
We initiated a lot of investment, but there's no traditional technologies there, because we just need to adapt to the new normal, and there's nothing traditional there.
Okay, so all changed for you.
Everything changed in a matter of weeks.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Many thanks, Dubravko. Okay. So let's get some thoughts from the poll. The question was, how has productivity changed during the pandemic period? We can see that actually the largest proportion of the audience, 22%, so that they were 10% more productive during the period. Interestingly, there was an additional 11% who were 5% more productive, and 17% who were 15% more productive. There was probably around 35% who were less productive and 17% who saw no change. So some interesting thoughts there. We can maybe feel free to comment on those as we move into the next section of the show. So the next section is all around towards a digital industry. It's all about the impact of digital. As you've all described, and as I'm sure every single one of our attendees has experienced, disruption is forcing firms to embrace digital technologies like never before. And as we shift from a hardware-centric to more of a software-based industry, the role of data will be increasingly critical. So here to explore some of those ideas in greater detail, I would like to ask Hank, Teodoro, and Saeed to kind of join David on the stage. And once again, David, I will hand over to you.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Interesting about that productivity as well, Ben. For me, I feel that we're being more productive, but it depends how you measure productivity and how efficient, the gains you're making with that as well. So just interesting from that poll there. So yeah, look, we're talking about digital. We're talking about the impact of digital, right? And the acceleration that we've seen. You mentioned there about data. So the question really I want to pose is around how are automotive firms using data and digital technology to drive improvements in both their operations and vehicles itself? What is the role of edge computing in this shift? And I'll come back to a little bit around simulation there. So let me start off with Saeed, if I can ask you to respond to that one.
Great. Thank you, David. We heard in the previous part about some of these kind of disruptions and changes that are happening. Obviously, digital transformation is on a fast pace with COVID in order to achieve certain goals that are really important. Productivity, we mentioned that, but also some of these changes that are related to ways to reduce costs, et cetera. So using data, what we see that there are exponential amounts of data that will be created at the edge particularly. And of course, when we look at vehicles, cars, trucks, buses, et cetera, and fleets, there are endpoints at the edge. And behind it, and Hank pointed to some of these work that's been going on, systems are not idle. That the data will flow across all of these elements in dynamic ways, in changing ways, and there will be millions of vehicles kind of running around exchanging data. So this is a really important aspect to it. When we look at it from our perspective as the largest infrastructure provider, we really see these new methodologies and new ways to accelerate this adoption through software-defined, cloud-native, edge, as you mentioned, David, AI, simulation, digital twins. All of these are kind of new and taking now center stage in trying to help drive forward to fill the gaps where we need more to operate in these constrained environments in such a way to cut the costs and be able to leverage these new technologies moving forward. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, Saeed, you mentioned there about, advances in simulation and digital twin technologies driving innovation, and you mentioned about it's helping to reduce operational costs. Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit around, how and in what way?
Absolutely. There was a question I think that came up around how do we kind of find the balance between less revenue and obviously being able to cutting the costs and be mindful of that, particularly as the OEMs are being hit hard during this period. When you look at it, a lot of these technologies kind of pushing forward areas of virtual product lifecycle, for instance, when you bring in the whole kind of thread of the lifecycle where data and compute are very important. And at the center of it, I would say that's one aspect. Hank talked a little bit earlier about a topic that I know very well as well around maintenance, being able to do predictive maintenance and prepare for that so you can actually cut some of these costs, but also around the topic of warranties, which to his point, it's a $50 to $60 billion problem. Those kind of things by leveraging simulation, digital twins. In addition to that, one of the I would say the most important problems around certifications to kind of lower the go-to markets for these products and be able to deal with those certifications is really important through those new technologies. Yeah.
Right, great. Thanks, Saeed. Sure. Let me bring in Teodoro. Teodoro, do you want to build on that? Again, same question to you. How the automotive firms using data and digital technology to drive improvements in both the operational and the vehicle itself?
Sure. Thanks, David. Well, I believe the fundamental change over the past 10 years or 15 years or so is that technology moved from being something in the back office and an element in the SG&A cost to squeeze and reduce, to become forefront at the center of a business model for automotive and mobility providers, and to become a board level element of discussion. And why? We believe it's because technology is relevant in at least three major dimensions. First, technology and software in particular is a key component of the car as a product. We increasingly talk about software-defined car, not just software-defined data centers, but software-defined cars, where the features of a car are actually predominantly defined and redefined by the software that runs into it, even dynamically, even over the air, and so on. And this means that in the car, there is a huge software life cycle that is to be managed that is core to the car in the same way as mechanical engineering has been core to the car for 100 years. And that's the first big element where technology is at the forefront of the car industry. The second element is around services and the product to service transformation. As we move from a relatively simple business model of selling cars as a product into a mobility world where we're talking services, we're talking about what's the best way to move from A to B using a combination of ownership, subscription, ride-hailing, rental, and so on. Service is an increasingly important component of the offering, and service are developed out of technology. Software, again, and everything that goes behind that, including hardware and infrastructure, is a critical component to develop, deliver, and maintain services for your customer. And that's the second element. The third element, I would say equally important, is technology is key when it comes to engaging with your customers and so managing the channel. Because the relationship between the brand and the consumer is increasingly driven mostly on the online channels and on channels supported by technology and enabled by data. So these are the three elements where technology is now at the forefront of the industry from our perspective. And then data is the one that you were mentioning correctly, is the one that goes across all of this. And when I say goes across, is because we believe as Accenture that data is the thing that is going to break the silos. If you look at silos by silos, function by function, which is the way OEMs have always been working, then you get a certain amount of effect. But if you are able to use data to go across the silos, then you get the end-to-end picture, then you can optimize the end-to-end picture. If I can go back to, just for a second, to the example that was, and we didn't talk about this before the panel, but about the warranty story. I think that's relevant because data and analytics can help you to optimize and squeeze the warranty spend and somehow also to shift it along the value chain from the OE to the dealer, from the OEM to the suppliers and so on. And that's a part of the game if you look at the function way. But if you take the data end to end, not just the warranty data, the connected car data, the product development data, the manufacturing data, and you are able to look across function with data, then you can really squeeze that 50 billion, not just shift from one side to the value chain to the other, but squeeze it because you feedback product development, you produce better cars that have less warranty costs. I hope the example is clear.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you, Teodoro. I see, Saeed, you were nodding away there. Is there anything you want to add to that? You just got to come off mute, Saeed. Saeed, if you can come off mute, there you go.
Yes, thank you. No, I'm in total agreement with Teodoro, and I think Hank would agree as well. The idea that you can thread these things together, get rid of the silos, the functional silos, particularly within the traditional OEMs, and create these capabilities and end-to-end definitely would amplify these new, I think the value brought by these new technologies. Warranty is just one example. We can talk about the digital manufacturing itself of the vehicles. When you bring all that together, you understand the product better and you understand the customer better, and those relationships will enable you to have a better capability, and of course, with reduced expense. Yeah. Thanks, David.
Thanks, Saeed. Hank, let me bring you into this discussion. Obviously, we've heard a lot there from Teodoro about the three different areas. The software-defined car, the services, and the engagement with the customer, and the stitching together the data. Do you want to give us your perspective? Hank?
I think he's on mute.
Hank, if you can pull yourself off mute.
Oh, now, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now, yes.
Sorry about that. Of course, the software-defined vehicle is critical to really fully capturing the benefit of the connectivity, because you've now virtualized the entire vehicle, right? You can run test cases against it. You can, capture continuous real-time vehicle data, decide what to transmit, what not. But of course, there's tons of things you can do even before that becomes universal. This importance of connect or well, there has to be restriction obviously for privacy and ownership concerns, but the ability to share data amongst numerous different providers in a standardized format, yet with some type of identity and access control security over top of it, is absolutely critical for this to move forward. There's so many people, even in the manufacturing step, that go into the production of a vehicle. Without some type of sharing, you're never going to realize the cost savings and the benefits that you see there. On the other side of the equation, the same goes once in post-production, once the vehicle's in the hands of individuals, right? Once, how do you get to the point where you're sharing data, with the environmental protection people to ensure that emissions are protected, compliance is there with the cities and counties for saving costs on roads, on all of the maintenance and the operational benefits that you can have. Until we standardize in some way for all of this data to be utilized yet protected across the industry, that is a critical element to success.
It's interesting, you mentioned sharing data. Some people talk about monetizing data, and I think it's good to have that balance there between the two, right?
Well, yeah, and when I say sharing data, it's because the way we like to pursue things is what is the crisp value proposition and the benefit to the customer, the owner of the vehicle, the OE who's producing the vehicle. At that point, let's look at that, and then you can almost always quickly find what is the best route to monetize. But I think we need to focus on value propositions to customers first. A lot of the early data sharing was, things like charging, your coffee to the car to drive through. The value proposition was somewhat questionable with a lot of the other methodologies we already have in our life. I think now the real focus is let's find the value propositions. The monetization will very quickly follow.
That's great. Ben, a very interesting discussion there. I want to leave it there because I know we've got some very good questions that are coming through. So I know we want to run the poll, but also give a chance to maybe answer some of the questions that the audience have been asking there.
Yeah, absolutely, David. So a fascinating conversation again. So we'll get a poll started. So the next one is about emerging technology. Which emerging technology will be key to delivering long-term business recovery? Is it automation, cloud computing, 5G networking? Is it remote maintenance, cybersecurity, AI, machine learning? Let's get some thoughts from the folks here in the audience. And whilst we do that, I think we can probably take another quick question from the audience. So we have a question from Adriano Machado. Should we have a new normal environment within the next 2 to 5 years? Was there a big turnover in previous development plans, standard operating procedures, etc.? So, how did you reprioritize? Was there a big reprioritization, and how fast will it take you to get to a new normal? Teodoro, let's perhaps come to you first with that one.
Well, I believe we need to look at this in different ways. Yes, there will be a new normal, especially when it comes to engaging with the consumers, because we do expect that assuming we're talking about the new normal post-COVID, the consumer interaction is going to be different. The consumer behavior, we need to read into that, and that's one thing. When we look at the core car product and SOP dates and vehicle programs, I believe that if we take a long enough horizon, so we're talking 5 years, there will not be major changes, frankly speaking. There are some delays, yes. We see some postponement. We're not seeing cancellation of vehicle programs at the moment. We're not seeing major shift. And if you look over the long term, the direction of the industry in terms of towards case, the 4 mega trends, is not changing. The trajectory to get to some of this, particularly the one with the longer return on investment such as autonomous, maybe slow down a bit because investment will be phased due to liquidity concern and so on. But over a long enough period of time, such as 5 years, I think the direction is not changing.
Yeah, okay. Many thanks, Teodoro. Okay, so the results from that last poll are in. So which emerging technology will be key to delivering long-term business recovery? The vast majority, over half, 52% say AI and machine learning is going to be the emerging technology. Also, big votes there for automation at 48%, cloud computing at 39%, about a quarter of you think that remote maintenance, about the same for 5G networking and cyber security as well. So an interesting spread. David, perhaps just get some thoughts from you as I introduce the next topic.
Yeah, I would say, for me, it was AI and ML. When you're looking, we've just had a discussion around data, and the impact. So for me, getting the right AI and ML strategy, for me, is going to be have one of the biggest impacts moving forward there.
Yeah, great. Many thanks. Okay, so the next section, all around rethinking the customer experience. We've touched upon this already in some of the previous parts. Customer experience is rapidly becoming the new competitive battleground in the automotive space. So what does the greater digitization of the industry mean for the customer experience? It's over to our panel to find out. So I think for this section, we have Gary, we have Teodoro, we have Dubravko and Saeed, alongside, of course, David Lander, who's going to be leading things out. So, folks, over to you.
Great. Yeah, so we've talked about the customer experience a number of times throughout this presentation, and I just want to focus on that now. So the question is around how is technology transforming the industry's ability to offer new levels of service, convenience, and delight? How can we respond quicker to changes in the customer demand and offer new delivery models that meet the changing expectations? So let me start with Gary, if that's okay with you. Gary,
yeah, absolutely.
Give us your thoughts on that.
This is quite a big change. Well, it's more than a big change, right? The traditional auto industry, if you look at least in the North American focus, almost a sell and forget type approach. The dealer owned the relationship post-delivery. So that's a pretty radical change to now having a continuous involvement with the customer, and also how to blend that in, how to blend that sharing of knowledge and data with the dealers to help keep them in business too, because of the change to the model, because the direct connectivity, the opportunity to do post-delivery sales of services, which are relatively complex and are quite different across the type of markets, as opposed to the individual car owner, the service unit, a truck, the delivery truck, the local delivery function, and then on the other extreme, the trucking market. And those customers are quite different. The fleet operator has a different expectation. And as we look forward into those services, in terms of manageability, keeping the trucks on the road, it was raised by one of the panelists earlier, keeping them on the road is the opportunity to continuously earn, obviously. So that's a different type of customer. But if we restrict ourselves to the traditional individual car owner, this new customer experience of perhaps not owning a car, the notion of a shared car, the notion of being able to pass cars around by keys, and that whole management, we need to make that identity and access management with the security overlay. I think it was raised earlier. This for me is a big focus. It's a customer experience make and break point that we have to come up with. And if you consider that along with the shared vehicle market, many of our large customers are fleet operators in the rental market. I think I've seen a few going broke type notes around various of these large operators. How does that change then the model for us as the supplier of fundamental product into this new service model? And how do we enable those businesses to survive? What does that new business model look like so that the customer experience is better? Clearly, we can now move to an entirely digital experience, and having to sign pieces of paper at the desk, and that whole experience model will change pretty dramatically. And how does Volkswagen as a group relate to doing that to enhance that customer experience? So many challenges here, not just a simple an obvious one's about helping the manufacturing side, but to truly help the customer experience. The data is everything, as has been said many times already. The customer expectation has been driven by this little thing like a phone, right? Which is pretty important to us all. The car kind of emulates that now, where we have to transparently to the customer provide updates, maintain strong security, and maintain customer loyalty. And these can be make or break points in the new normal. And it's not, as people say, well, the phone people have done it, it's easy. Okay, the phone people have a life cycle of product that's 3 to 5 years. We have 10, 15, 20-year life cycles to maintain that customer experience and loyalty over. So it's quite a different lifetime model.
Yeah, I think drawing on from your experience at Tesla and now.
Sorry, David, I lost you there.
Yeah. Ben?
It's also a cultural change.
You're back, David.
You're back, David. Sorry, we lost you for a moment, David.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Gary, building on from your experience of working at Tesla, it's not just a technology change, it's a cultural change as well, right? Which is just as big a shift in the company.
Yeah, Tesla's obviously model was built from the get-go on having continuous connectivity to the customer as a supplier. And I guess that's probably similar for Rimac as another a pure electric vehicle supplier. Yeah, so the business model there was built in quite a different fashion. So the whole notion of having dealerships and so on. So the customer experience there is radically different. It's all delivery endpoints. How will that change for the large OEMs? I think that is still in discussion as to what that new model looks like. And its part in playing and making changes to the customer experience.
Okay. Let me bring Teodoro. Teodoro, do you want to add to what Gary was just saying?
Yeah, no, I think great points by Gary already in terms of one angle, which is this end-to-end life cycle of the relationship between the brand and the consumer. I think that's a very relevant angle. I completely share it. The other angle, if you want, we can take is the one of what we call liquid customer expectation. When we talk about liquid customer expectation, this means that for us as consumer, the expectation of what you want to have during a sales process, during a car repair process, or when you drive a car is today shaped by our iPhones, by our experience on the one-click buy on Amazon, and this kind of things, right, on the digital world, digitally native world. And we expect the same when we go into a dealership. And today we don't get that. That's the reality. So what consumers expect is a direct connection with the brand, a direct connection with the brand. They not a too much mediated one. They expect a personalized service, personalized content. They don't want to see Super Bowl advertising to just push. I mean, that's part of the story, but there is another part of the story that since you have so many data that you know me, why don't you send me relevant content, relevant emails, relevant text, relevant information while I'm driving? I think that is super key in terms of changing the customer experience. And finally, they expect a seamless online and offline experience. They don't want to have two separate worlds where they go online on the website, they configure a car, and then you go back to a dealer or to a point of sales and you start from scratch. I already selected what I want. I want to go just to finalize if I really need to do it. And if there is one thing that COVID has done since back in 2020 now is accelerating this. Because if you take a customer journey, which is composed by both online and offline components, over the past few months, the offline components went away, disappeared, because it was not possible to get out, right, and to go into a physical store in most of the world. And so this means that that created the need to reinforce the digital points and to make sure that the connection between the online and the offline is even better. And I think that is where we're going to see even more investments coming in. We're going to see changes to the model, more disintermediated model, but also wherever we see dealer, which are going to stay for a number of reasons for the traditional OEMs, and I'm not saying they shouldn't, I mean, there are all good reasons to do it. The store format needs to change and needs to be much more technology driven and much more integrated into the overall digitally led cycle.
Right, absolutely. Again, I just want to move it along quickly because we've got lots of great questions coming in. I really want to move in that. Dubravko, do you want to just give us a very short answer? I mean, Gary mentioned about Rimac,
Gary,
experience, that must be very close to your heart, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We already talked that cars are starting to be software-defined cars. We already compared cars with the phones. Now the customer experience on the cars and the phones are different because of the life cycle. You have 15 years life cycle on the cars, as Gary mentioned, but customers are still trying to use the car the same as the phone. They expect new features during the life cycle. I want to start my car and I see a new feature. I have a weather forecast. I have a new AI function. I have augmented reality. I have a connection to a new social network that came 10 years after the car was bought. So the support of the customer during these 15 years will be a challenge. How to redefine the car once it is bought. That is the new customer experience that we need to drive to.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Some great points there, and again, I'm sure we could continue there, but some great interaction there. So Ben, we've got some great questions coming in. Let me hand back to you.
Yeah, we absolutely do. Thanks, David. Perhaps it'd be a good opportunity to invite all our panelists back up to the virtual stage as we look to field some of the questions that have been coming in thick and fast. It has to be said. There's a great question here. Actually, both Werner Peter and Andy Gill have similar questions here. Around relevancy. How can the traditional OEMs stay relevant in the autonomous vehicle future, especially when looking at technology companies such as Waymo and Amazon, which have very deep pockets and large expertise and knowledge with data and customer value propositions? That seems to follow on quite nicely from the question, from the discussion we were just having. Who wants to field that one first? Dubravko, maybe we'll come to you first.
How traditional OEMs will stay relevant. Don't forget, we are still building cars. You need to have knowledge how to build a car. Then you add autonomous driving and vehicle. Every company that we have this on panel has their fingers in developing autonomous car. Maybe they're not that well known compared to Amazon and such companies, but every company here have some share in developing autonomous driving, even my company also. So they will stay relevant, trust me.
Yeah. Okay. How about yourself, Gary? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So the Volkswagen Group committed itself a short while ago to formulating a tech company within the Volkswagen Group. So we have a new organization headed up at the board level, described as the Car Software Organization. So it's bringing together that technology thrust. It's recognizing that there's a shift in the lead technology here. So the software-defined automotive future is clearly in front of us. So in response to that, as a group, that's what's been set up as a pivot point. It started probably around about 2 years ago, and the Car Software Organization and the cloud team, of which I'm a member, is a segment of the Car Software Organization for the whole group across without regard to brand. So there's an attempt here to provide a more coherent experience across brands as well.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Gary. Hank, do you want to provide a tier one perspective? Sorry, Hank, you may be on mute there again.
Sorry, the UX is different for each conferencing system here. So as both a tier one and as an autonomous vehicle developer, as you may or may not know, we have a large autonomous vehicle division, as well as we do joint ventures with OEs directly. I think keeping relevancy is also looking at, obviously all the technology things were mentioned, I completely agree with, but also new business models and the way car ownership, vehicle management is distribution, ownership. I believe some of that may change in the autonomous world. And I think one of the critical things, and I think a lot of the OEs are already doing that, is exploring what is the new model of ownership, right? Obviously, an autonomous vehicle is going to cost more. And it's going to make more sense when it's running more. So what does that mean for the world and the way the vehicle's owned, the way it's operated, the way it's maintained? And I think we all of the OEs as well as the tier ones have to look at how do we support that moving forward? How does our business model change? It's almost potentially akin to the movement from taxis to Uber, right? Or Airbnb and whatnot in the past, both of which were affected obviously by COVID, but I think we have to look at that as well.
Yeah, okay, great. Many thanks, Hank. And we've got another question here from George Massing. Where do you see the point of differentiation between the different OEMs? If everyone, for example, moves to the same platform, George gives the example of an Android platform, but where's the point of differentiation? Teodoro, let's maybe come to you with that one.
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. I mean, on one end, if you look at only the product, we all believe that when we talk software-defined car, the differentiation is going to come from software as much as it came from horsepower in the past, right? So a differentiated software, and we know that software is built in stack, is going to make a difference, and that is going to be a factor for customers to choose, and that's one part of the story. The other part is the brand, and it's the experience, and that's the experience you offer to your consumer as a brand, and the fact that you want to be related to owning a certain brand. But this also goes back, I think, to the previous discussion we just had about the different players. I think what we're going to do is we're going to move from a very much vertically integrated world, which was built on one simple thing, which is scale. Every OEM builds scale, to a much more integrated ecosystem. And it's an ecosystem that goes from suppliers such as Aptiv to the original OEMs, but then to the service provider, the Ubers of this world. And all of them serve into a different way to enable the consumers to move from A to B in what is the most effective way. And each one of them plays a part. And then the point is going to be about how is the profit pool, which is much larger than what we see today, going to be distributed among these players? That I think is the fundamental question. And then we also need to look at what's happening in other industries. If you take the example of airlines, and air transportation, today you have a front end, which is line you choose to fly, and is differentiated by the loyalty programs, the connection schedule, and so on. And on the back of the airlines, you have the Boeing and the Airbus that have built huge scale because they are manufacturer and the consumer doesn't see the brand. Is this a model? It may be. Is it someone owning the whole stack? I believe it's take an ecosystem, and a lot of things will reshuffle over the next 10, 15 years.
Yeah, great. Many thanks, Teodoro. Really interesting perspective. We've got a couple of really interesting questions on data here as well. But Saeed, perhaps I can come to you with these ones. We've got Alexander Kreis, who asks, how can data be used outside the silos of the OEMs? And Werner Peter, personalized services require deep analysis of customer data. So, same customer who is sharing his data live over Facebook becomes concerned to share his data once he is in the car. How do you tackle this?
That's a really good question, yeah. So first of all, in terms of data, as I mentioned earlier, and it was also mentioned by Gary and others, it's really important for a lot of these sources of data to be kind of integrated so we can get out of these silos. Teodoro mentioned that as well. But as we do that, obviously issues related to cybersecurity, related to privacy particularly, and these concerns can be even regional, different regulations, different countries, are going to be very important. I think Gary mentioned the question of identity. When you are, let's say, the owner of a fleet, you have an identity. You are the manufacturer, the vehicle has an identity. You are the driver, you got an identity. Ben, you and I getting in the vehicle with Gary, with our own phones connected to that vehicle, we're going to have identities included. We need to manage that. This is work we're doing at Dell Technologies as much as our colleagues and customers. It's really important to deal with it. Issues related to de-identification, anonymization, being able to do that in order to deliver that experience, that new experience, which is at the center, in my view, I think it's mentioned by a few of the colleagues here on the panel, is going to be important to deliver that new kind of generation of services and making sure that it would work. To Gary's point earlier, there is a make or break for that user experience, definitely, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Many thanks, Saeed. So we've got one more poll to launch. I'll just do that before we go any further. It's all about the current environment. What's the one challenge presented by the current environment that carries the most risk for you? Is it working from home? Is it security? Is it lack of data? Disruption to supply chains? Is it shifting consumer behavior and demand? I've launched that poll. I'm just going to come now to a question, maybe I guess about appetite and demand and the kind of the industry as a whole. How do you see this tension between the need of globalization for 5G and EV development on the one hand, and the request for relocalization due to COVID-19 anxiety? Do you think fear about the global business interactions will slow down the mobility revolution? Is one question there from Bruno Grippe. And Mark Pinnell asks, how do you think the interest of customers for the car has changed before and after COVID? So some interesting questions there about how the industry is changing. We'll maybe come to you, Gary, with that one if we can.
Yeah, I think the answer is it's very muddy right now. I think people are so wrapped up in their own regional dilemma, although many well-managed countries are doing better than the country I reside in these days in terms of outbreak and management. So I'm seeing mysterious patterns from many patterns, not mysterious, but many patterns. I don't see any obvious clarity at this point. I'll be interested in an opinion. Perhaps Teodoro might have something who looks at it more analytically on a global basis. So it would be good feedback. Yeah, well, let's come to Teodoro. Get some thoughts from you.
Yeah, it's still very difficult to see a direction in that sense. I mean, we do see different responses in different markets, and that depends also on the starting point. I mean, for instance, there was a question also about the usage of car in a post-COVID world, right? You mentioned if you take China with a very low penetration of car per inhabitant, so car per household, this is driving demand up back again with a very much V-shaped curve because people want a car to drive back to the office in safety, and they didn't have one, and so they're switching away from public mobility to private owned car very quickly. The same is not happening in Europe, even in the countries where, because the market is already pretty much at the top, and so we're not seeing that speed in recovery. Then you compound this to the supply chain anxiety about the dependency from one region to the other, but also to something which was already happening, which is about diverse regulation, especially when it comes to emission and electrification. This is a topic which is extremely driven by regulation nowadays. I mean, because governments across the world are helping to push in one direction or the other, and that is pushing towards a different product development strategy. So yes, there is a tendency towards regionalization, but the industry needs scale. A lot of what of this scale is provided by being global, especially when it comes to the technology side, which can then be adapted to more local production and to more local products. That's the way we see it, at least. And this really means, I think the key fundamental point for us is there is no crystal ball. Nobody is a crystal ball. Everyone is going to need to navigate uncertainty. And navigating uncertainty in the right way is what's going to differentiate the winners from the losers over the next couple of years responding to this emergency.
Yeah, absolutely. Many thanks, Teodoro. The results from that poll are in, and I think actually they kind of reflect some of what you've just discussed there. We've got what's the one challenge presented by the current environment that carries the most risk? Overwhelming favourite is shifting consumer behaviour and demand, which is 65%. Disruption to supply chains next at 35%. David, let's perhaps come to you for some comment on that and some final thoughts as we look to wrap things up.
Yeah, no surprise at all. I think China was the first to shut down and open up, and I think they saw a dramatic change to their consumer behaviour, buying online. Again, just come back to we've gone through 5 years of digital acceleration in the last 3 months, and buying things online, e-commerce, and the customer expectations, it's just gone up, and I think the industry needs to respond to that as we were discussing. So one of many challenges to overcome there. So yeah, I completely agree with that, the majority there.
Yeah, folks, many thanks for sharing your thoughts. A big thanks to our panel. Some fascinating insights and some brilliant questions from the audience as well. So thank you all for sending in your questions. Apologies we didn't get through them all. We will endeavour to get them all answered. We're actually going to follow up with you all with regards to a LinkedIn community that we're setting up around this topic. So obviously some of those questions can be answered and posed in that forum. So do look out for that. We have got some further events in this series coming up as well. So we have one next week on the cyber threat, and one the following week looking around the finance leader of the future. So do join us for those if that is something that you are interested in. Other than that, folks, I just want to thank the panel once again for sharing their insights. Thank you all for your attendance and your attention. Much appreciated. See you next time on Transformation Tune In.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, guys.